How do you use corporate governance to coordinate the competitive advantage? That's the topic we are going to be analyzing now. Hello, my name is Álvaro Cuervo. Welcome to the course of strategy. Today, what we're going to be doing is trying to understand the coordination of competitive advantage, and this follows the analysis that we did of leadership, and we will continue with corporate culture. So for this, I'm going to first start with a brief introduction to what is corporate governance. Then we'll talk about the debate that we have between shareholders and stakeholders' view of the company, and then I'll go deeper into the analysis of the role of the board in trying to support the advantage of our corporation. This is building on some of the knowledge that you already have on finance, but I'm going to be adding to it part of the strategic management approach to corporate governance. So how do we start with this? Understanding corporate governance. What is this? All the mechanisms, the processes, the ways in which the company is managed and controlled. The objective here is to have a company that is properly run, and first you have to start with an analysis of all the relationships that you have. This is linking back to the story of agency theory and the approach that corporations are bundles of contracts. We have both explicit contracts, similar to what you experience when you join a company. You write a contract that establishes how much you're going to be paid and some of the expectations that they have on your behavior, but there are also lots of different implicit contracts regarding your behavior there that are not written, but as you join, you're going to be learning from observing others, from looking at how they come at a particular time, the time in which people are expected to leave, and some of the, if you want, analysis that you have of the social mechanisms by which people are relating to each other. From there, we also have to understand how rights, responsibilities, and decision-making are distributed within the company, who is in charge, who has the right for certain decisions, what are the decisions, how are they going to be made, and then finally, how do we solve the disputes that we may have in these relationships. Again, both of these can be contracts that are implicit, are also contracts that are explicit. How do we solve these issues? All of this is trying to understand how to manage a company better. So, as I mentioned, this is based mostly on the agency theory that you might have seen in finance. This is going to be a brief recap of this theory. We start with what is an agency relationship. So any relationship in which we have a principal, an individual, sometimes an organization, and an organization that is going to hire another to ask that person to achieve something for them. The idea is that I don't have the ability, the time to make certain decisions. I'm going to ask somebody else to do them in my name. What happens here, and there is certain assumptions that again are coming from economics, and that drive many of the implicit expectations that we have within this theory. Assumptions, and these are important for understanding why is it that we have all these agency conflicts and agency problems that we are going to be discussing later. The first one is that there is imperfect and asymmetric information. The principal and the agent know very different things, and they don't know everything that the other knows, which means that I cannot really understand what the other person is doing. I cannot really observe everything that the other person has been doing. And in some cases, it also gets into an issue that I don't understand what I am being asked to do, what is the expectation that they have of my behavior. We also have an issue of imperfect contracting. I cannot write a contract that specifies everything that I want the other person to do. It's not only the issue that I cannot observe their behavior, but there are lots of different decisions that the other person has to be making, and that I cannot write down in a contract and specify and establish if this happens, this is what it should be expected to do. The other thing, and this is important, it's coming from economics, assumptions of homo economicus, which means that as an individual and have a particular objective, I want to maximize my objective. And this is an important expectation from the theory, in the sense that we're not talking about satisfying in the sense that I'm going to be okay if I reach a particular level, but I'm always going to try to optimize. This story means that in some cases, if you push it really hard as a theory, my objective is to minimize my effort in any kind of relationships and try to maximize my benefits in those relationships. This might be an extreme view of the world, but it drives many of the predictions of the theory, so it is important to understand the assumptions. And then we have another assumption that is important. Risk aversion is very different. As a manager, or in this particular case, as the principal, I might not be willing to take some risks because my assets, my resources, my money is at stake, whereas my agent might be willing to take many more risks than I do. Or it can be also vice versa. I wanted to take risks, but if something goes wrong and they don't do well, then that's going to be affecting their potential future career prospects, and that means that they might be risk averse. And then finally, and this is important, and this also links to the discussion we had before, there is a difference in objectives. The principals want to achieve something, the agent has a different objective. This divergence in objective with the addition of asymmetric information means that it's going to be really complex to make sure that the person I have hired is going to achieve what I want them to do. This is important because not only it also explains many of the agency relationships that we have seen in finance, which are the typical shareholder manager or debt holder manager, in which I am an owner, I don't want or I cannot manage a company, I'm going to hire somebody to do it for me, and I'm going to allow them to make certain decisions in the expectation that they are going to make the best decisions to achieve my objectives. The assumption here is going to be profitability. The question here is maybe this manager is not making the right decisions for the achievement of profitability, the manager is not making the right effort, and it's just allowing the company to move on, and we're going to get good results just because the market happens to be growing. So there is this conflict between the manager and the owner. There is another similar conflict between debt holders and managers. I'm going to loan you some money. I don't want you to take too many risks because I don't want to have that money disappear. As a manager, I may be willing to take more risks because, look, if there is a big upswing and I may do very well with the company, my incentive systems are tied to how well the company is doing, and therefore I'm going to be successful. If there is some problems, well, maybe yes, I lose my job, the company goes bankrupt, you as a debt holder are going to have a much bigger impact. This is the traditional viewpoint. What I want to do is extend this discussion to other decisions. This is one important area, which is employment. We still can see it as a principal agent. You have a manager who is asking an employee to do certain things and is expecting certain effort towards the achievement of those objectives. Or I'm going to have a manager who hires somebody to do some job for the company. This is an area which again gets into the issue of imperfect information. I don't know how well they are doing the job. I don't know whether they are putting the right effort. The only thing in some cases that I can see is outcome. Other relationships that we can think in terms of principal agent, supplier relationships. I am running the company, I need some inputs. For example, I happen to be a restaurant. I want the best produce for my restaurant. I'm going to have a supplier. I have a long-term relationship with them. I'm expecting them to give me very good meat cuts, very good fresh vegetables. And they come and maybe that's not what they have. They try to give me something that is not the quality I expect, or they want to increase the price and they are delivering it late when I'm close to opening. There are all these different dimensions in which we have this agency relationship. And something similar can happen also with distribution relationships, which I'm asking somebody to help me sell my products. Typical or simpler way to analyze this is within a franchising decision relationship, in which I'm asking my franchisee, look, I want you to have extremely good service to the customers. I want you to have very clean facilities. I want you to have very good delivery of the products. If it happens to be a textile apparel company, this is how you have to present it. If it happens to be a food company, this is how you have to serve it. However, as an agent, as a franchisor, I'm thinking, look, I want to make money. If I have all these people, personnel making all this effort, I'm not going to be able to be profitable. So maybe I cut somebody from the team and I just speed up all the process. I'm not as good as what you expect me to do. That might have a negative impact on the brand of the company, but it's going to improve my profitability. All of these are agency relationships. So continuing with this conflict between interests, the objectives are going to be different. There is asymmetry of information. It's difficult to establish contracts, creates these agency problems, of which we have two in terms of types. And the two main ones are adverse selection. This is the agency problem in which I don't know the quality. I cannot observe the person before I establish a contract. This is, for example, what happens in employment relationships. You go to an interview, you present yourself in the best way possible, and they are asking you lots of questions to try to reduce the symmetries of information between what you actually did and what they think that you have done. If you want to continue some examples, you go to the bank. Why do they ask you to provide information? Hey, what is your score? Do you have any collateral? What is your work experience? How good is your job? Why do they want to do that? They want to know whether you are going to be able in the future to pay back the loan. And they might ask you for collateral, not so much because they are interested in having the collateral, but because that will provide you an additional incentive to repay the loan. It's an ability to repay that they are trying to achieve. All of this is before the contract. And the challenge here is that you might be entering in a relationship with somebody that is not the best. The second one is moral hazard. Once you have established the contract, now, yes, I am working here. Now, you gave me a loan. Now, I am your supplier. I might not behave the way you expect me to. I might not be taking care of the car the way you want me to. I might be not making too much effort in my job, and maybe I come to the office and I just use the computer for other activities. And at the end of the day, you don't really observe my behavior. What you observe is the outcome, and from there you infer that, yes, I did a very good job, and maybe I was lucky. Maybe I was part of a team and the other people were doing a good job, and I nevertheless get rewarded for that good outcome. This is the other challenge. So two different problems, adverse selection, moral hazard. Do we have a challenge, a problem of asymmetries of information and an inability to relate differences in objectives before or after the contract? And how do we solve this? We have different ways of trying to address this that go back to the different assumptions. The issue of monitoring, try to control behavior. I cannot observe behavior. I'm going to try to observe that behavior and reduce information asymmetries. Issues of incentives. I'm going to provide incentives so that you align your behavior to what I want you to achieve. In other cases, I might constrain your behavior. I'm not going to allow you to take certain decisions, or in what happens in many cases when you go into employment. Yes, it is great that you can do telecommuting, but some occasions they ask you to come to the office in addition to establishing social relations and working with the team and everything else. There is some expectation that you are not going to be distracted as much as if you were working from home. And to some extent, the extreme case to align behavior is punishment. If you don't behave as expected, it can be extreme behavior, extreme punishment of well, you are fired because you are not doing what we are asking you to do, or you are not going to get a promotion, or you are not going to get a salary increase, things like this. So the idea is, I'm the principal, I have to design several mechanisms so that your behavior is going to be aligned with what I want you to do, so that eventually you achieve my objectives. In the particular case of management-owner relationships, we have a longer list of control mechanisms. which tied directly to the discussion of corporate governance. And then we have the story of internal mechanisms, incentive systems. I'm going to pay you based on good outcome. And the typical way of doing this is, yes, you have a base salary. If you achieve certain objectives, I'm going to give you bonuses, which in some cases can be a relatively large part of your income. And especially I might do it if it is a publicly traded company in a way so that your incentives are purely aligned with the assumed objective of managers, shareholders in publicly traded companies, that the only objective is profitability. So let's give you stock options. I make you implicitly an owner, which means that if the price of the company, the stock price of the company goes up, you are going to do very well, so you will have an alignment of objectives. This can in some cases lead to misbehavior, because then there is a very high-powered incentive to just try to make sure that the stock price goes up, and there are some accounting and changes in investments that you can do so that in the short term you can achieve that. Okay, then I'm going to do long-term stock options. You can play with this, but the idea is the incentive system is going to try to reduce misbehavior. You also have internal policies and regulations that are going to tell you what to do or what you cannot do, so that this behavior is also aligned. There is internal market for managers, which means that there's going to be internal competition. You join the company, and there you are going to be competing against others at your level for promotions, for increases in salaries, for eventually having a good career in the company. That will push you to do what is supposed to be good for the company rather than for yourself. The board of directors is kind of the final internal mechanism, and here the story is there's going to be an overview of the decisions of managers in general, and some kind of oversight over what they are doing. And finally, there is another level, there's another type of control, which is shareholders. And in particular, concentrated owners. The challenge of companies in the stock market is that in many cases, there are lots of very small shareholders who have very little incentive in trying to exercise control over managers, and not only incentives, they can't. When you are a concentrated owner, you control most of the company, very typical of family-owned companies. Your money is there, and if something goes wrong, you are going to lose the money, so you have a big incentive. And also, if you control a large chunk of the stock, the ability to influence what is happening with management, and if you are not achieving what you want, you can eventually replace them through the board of directors. That's one way. These are internal mechanisms. We also have external mechanisms that try to align behavior in companies, but they tend to be much more long-term, if you want, in the sense that lots of very problematic things have to happen before they can be used. Regulation is one of them, and this is at the government level. You establish certain parameters by which companies and managers in companies have to abide. Then you have the market for corporate control, and this is if the company is not being managed properly. Expectation is that the stock price is going to reflect this, and eventually that gives enough incentive for some other managerial group to think, well, company is poorly managed, why don't we just buy it? All we have to do is then replace the managers, and we bring some better management skills, and the stock price is going to go up, and that's going to enable us to recover the premium that we pay for the company. Then we have leverage, and the story here is if instead of funding or having a lot of funding through stock or having a lot of money, cash at hand, you make a company highly leveraged, that constrains the ability of managers to invest. Why? Because any good investment, they will have to go back to the stock, to the capital markets or the stock owners for additional capital, which means that the expectation is, well, they are going to more or less take only the investment decisions that are good for the company, or that can be sold to potential investors. There is a limitation to this that in some cases, if you are over leveraged, that might constrain the company and its ability to actually survive. Then finally, the product market as the final type of control. If the company is so poorly managed that nothing really works well and that products are not being produced properly with the quality that is expected, the service is really bad, eventually customers might say, look, I'm going to buy it from somebody else, and the company will eventually go bankrupt. But this is a very extreme case. So there is a large variety of controls within companies to try to align behavior. Now, the next thing is this financial approach in comparison to, if you want, a more sociological approach. Traditional view of the company, coming from finance, is a shareholder viewpoint in which you have is an objective of maximizing value. Initially, the discussion was maximizing profitability. That has now evolved into the maximizing value for shareholders. Why is this? Partly because not all shareholders want profitability. If you think about family-owned companies or state-owned companies, in many cases, those companies are not really trying to achieve the highest level of profits. Instead, what they are trying to achieve is what you can call the highest level of value for the particular owners. Take family-owned companies, it might be more important for the family-owned company long-term survival and maybe hiring members of the family and ensuring that, look, the name stays there because we have lots of social emotional wealth invested in the company in addition to traditional financial wealth. In the case of state-owned companies, it might be the objective of the state not so much to make a lot of money, but rather to provide social benefits to society. Think about healthcare or education. And here we are not trying to really push for maximum profitability, but some investments that have a lot of positive externalities on society. That's that's why now we are talking more about value for shareholders rather than profitability. Nevertheless, the story here is that you're maximizing, and the shareholders have the primacy. Why is this the case? There is a big assumption. The story is that, look, we assume that everybody else that has a relationship with the company is compensated fairly in the market. There is a good market for labor, so managers and employees, if they agree to be in the company, the salary they negotiate is the salary that is compensating their effort and all the investment. If we have suppliers, whatever they are going to give us and the relationships we establish with them and the collaborations we have, there is a market for that level of investments. The same thing with distributors. Anybody that is related to the company, there is an assumption that markets more or less work well. If we create the maximum value, everybody gets their own fair share according to markets that work well, and what is left is basically what is for the owners. There is also this, from there you go into the, if you want a conclusion that any other investments, social goals, corporate social responsibility, ESG, that are now being discussed are not quite something that you should do if they are going to undermine value creation. That's one approach that is coming from economics and finance. Now we have an alternative one which has been informed to some extent by issues of ethics, sociology, and the story is stakeholder theory. And there is also an economic approach to stakeholder theory, which informs some of the logic. The story here is that, look, it's not, yes, shareholders are the owners, but what they do is they just put money in it. There are many other groups that are putting something that is also valuable, but there is not a good market for this type of investments. You're an employee, you invest a lot of effort and time to try to build your network within the company, your social capital, and capital that is specific to the company so that you do a much better work. That there isn't really a good market to compensate for that type of investment. Relationships with suppliers and distributors can be also seen this way. There is also the issue of how do you affect society. And this, and the important thing here is a story of fairness. And again, it's tricky in the sense that now we're talking about negotiation, now we're talking about the expectations of different groups, and that, look, it is not only shareholders, the ones that we should take into account, but other groups. Part of it is the issue of externalities. Yes, there are markets, but the markets are imperfect, and especially we might have a concern of externalities, which can be positive and negative. A company operates in a small town, for example. It employs employees. Those employees are going to have a positive impact on the city because they are going to be buying groceries and then buying houses or renting houses. There is going to be demand for entertainment. At the same time, the company is going to be paying local taxes, so they can invest more in the local schools or infrastructure. There are positive externalities to economic activity. There are also negative externalities. The typical one is pollution. Yes, you might be following the regulations of the location, but nevertheless, there might be some problems that, yes, you are still polluting the air, or you're polluting the water, or you're extracting too much water or too many resources from the local environment. So what happens here is that, look, we cannot really expect the market to work that well. We have to get into bargaining negotiations. How do we address this type of externalities? These are two different points of view. And here the story is which one is better. There isn't which one is better. It is which one do you believe in, which one, how do you see relationships? This is important because then from this, we have to understand how do we make better decisions. In many cases, it depends on your view of what is the objective of the company and what should the company be achieving, and how do you integrate others rather you just focusing on maximizing profitability and shareholder wealth, or are you going to take into account what is happening outside that particular relation and what is happening with other groups? Now, how do we solve this? This is one of the mechanisms that I mentioned before, but one in which it is, if you want, particularly important because it does connect the company to shareholders and managers. And it is a mechanism that to some extent has the highest level of impact in decision making, other than internal markets for managers. The role of the board of directors. Again, comparing this to finance, the typical approach from finance is monitoring and control. That's what the board of directors is expected to do. There is also, and this is now a link into sociology and management, well, it's not only monitoring and control, they are also going to provide a lot of knowledge and expertise that can help the company make better decisions. And then there is a lot of importance in having the right connections and relationships. And this is particularly important in some cases when a company is making it's relatively complex and you want people who want to think beyond what is currently happening now. The management team tends to focus very closely on this is the company, this is how we have to manage the company better. And there is a lot of pressure towards short term or most medium term. The idea here is that the board, they are not involved in the day-to-day. They can step outside that discussion and then think about which are the bigger directions that we want this company to take. So some key features that we have to think about in the composition. How many directors do we have? That's the first thing. Usual expectation is about 1,000 tends to be the right number. And there has been a lot of evolution in the analysis of optimal boards and the lots of codes and proposing the best way to manage companies, going all the way to the 1990s. The Cadbury report in the UK 92 was one of the pioneering codes here. And the story is about 1,000 so that we have enough people with lots of wide variety of opinions and expertise, but it is not too big so that at the end you don't get into decision making. Things to think about. Insider outsiders in the sense of how many people are going to be actual managers within the company, how many are not going to be involved in the day-to-day operations of the company. Among them, how many, if we are talking about the outsiders, are going to be representing shareholders directly, how many are going to be independent, which means that they are going to provide a view of what is happening with the company without, if you want, the pressure of shareholders wanting to achieve a particular objective. Other variations and in terms of the composition, functional expertise, somebody from finance, somebody from operations, somebody from strategy, somebody from legal, so that you have a diversity of opinions. Age and experience play a big role into getting away from the groupthink, the same as gender, and try to think about, look, we have a diversity of opinions. Diversity is good in the board of directors. That's kind of expectations of much of recent research. In the same, why is this good? Because then you are going to have an actual discussion of what is happening with the company rather than the typical rubber stamping of, yes, these are the, do we think is good? Everybody agrees, yes, of course, because we think alike. Other things to think about, the structure, and trying to avoid CEO duality, imperial CEOs, in the sense that if the CEO, chief executive officer, who's running the company is also the chair of the board, you end up in a situation in which you, the CEO, is to some extent monitoring and controlling himself. There is a lot of backlash against this idea. Let's separate this role so that somebody external can provide an opinion on what is supposedly best for the company. And then we have issues to discuss in terms of committees. Audit, risk, remuneration, nomination, very typical. Social and ethics, not always the case, but now increasing numbers of companies are getting them. And then something important to remember, board interlocks. You may have a person that is in multiple boards, and this is another source of information that you can bring from other companies so that you can eventually make better decisions. One recommendation on the role of the board is 3 principles to try to move boards away from what is perceived as being some practices that are not working well. The first one is managing the company for the long term. And this is one of the biggest criticisms of publicly traded companies, because you have to produce quarterly results and you to some extent have to match the expectations of analysts. You're focusing only on what is going to happen in the next few months, and you have very little time to think about the future. Managers, that's a role. Boards should think broader and especially think in long term. And with this, maybe reduce the earnings guidance. Some companies have done it, very few of them, because there is always the expectation that, no, you have to tell us what is really happening here. Staggered boards might be another way to reduce the focus on short-termism. Then finally, include exclusive foreign provisions rather than suing for misbehavior in any location. The recommendation, and this is coming from the reading by Subramanian, is whatever the company is incorporated, that's the place in which it should be. If shareholders are not happy with what is happening, we should. This reduces the focus on short term. Second one is the best people in the board. Minimum for the evaluations, many of the evaluations are done internally, and it's difficult to evaluate people with whom you are having a conversation, having a meal. You might be friends. Recommendation here is have somebody external to the company, to the board, that comes and does an actual evaluation of what each board member is adding to the decision making. And then another recommendation is shareholder proxies. They should be considered as a backstop. Then finally, orderly voice for shareholders. Shareholders might disagree with the decisions of the board. There's nothing wrong with that, but the recommendation is to go beyond the traditional, if you want, conflicting view with a board and to get into something that is much more cooperative. Defensive measures, maybe not, they are not that great. Poison pills are not really that great. This is a summary of the discussion. You can see more in Subramanian. And the idea here is trying to think long-term, trying to think what is best for the company rather than be pressured to just make good profitability today, which is one of the, if you want, conclusions that comes from this discussion. Corporate governance is really important because it's giving you an understanding of how do you manage and control the company. In general, people want to make good decisions. If you want, there is professional pride, there is incentives to have a good career, and there is issues of reputation, but it's always difficult to understand whether that's the right decision or not. We have a particular viewpoint in general in the analysis of corporate governance that is coming from agency theory, which assumes that individuals are going to be focusing on their own objectives, and because of asymmetry of information, a very difficult contracting, and this divergence of objectives, we are going to have conflicts. We have to reduce those agency problems, of which we have the two main, which is imperfect, adverse selection and moral hazard. And the way to do this is through monitoring and control mechanisms, plus adding incentives that align objectives. All of this is good, and it's informed from finance, but there is an important change, if you want, in the attitude and the analysis of corporate governance in trying to incorporate stakeholders in the discussion, going beyond the primacy of owners as the only group that should have their objective maximized, and trying to understand that, look, for the long term, if every group that is affected by the company and affects the company gets what they consider their fair share of the deal, the company is going to be better managed, and especially is going to be working very well for the long term. And for this, board's recommendation is here to reorganize how they are structured, to reorganize how they think, or reorganize their processes so that they think about long term and they go beyond the confrontational approach to something that is much more operative. So this is the story of corporate governance in strategic management. I hope that you liked it, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.